Hello everyone and welcome to Candyspace's latest edition of CX Conversations, which I'm really excited about because we are going to be talking about the 3 key things that agencies should know about procurement and vice versa, the 3 key things procurement should know about agencies. I'm Matt Simpson, I'm the Managing Director at Candyspace. We're a business that designs, builds and optimises digital products on behalf of clients such as ITV, Mars, Mazda, Global Media and Entertainment and many others. And to help me, I'm really happy to say I've got Stuart Dunk here, who is a procurement professional who's moved into consulting, which he'll tell you about. Stu and I have actually known each other for a long time. He was on the other side of the table from me when my previous agency was pitching for Reckitt Benckiser and Nike. So he's a vastly experienced procurement professional, and we are going to have a lively debate today. Anyway, Stu, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so as Matt said, we met each other the opposite side of the table a long time ago. My background is 15 years marketing procurement at Betfair, Reckitt, Nike, and until 2019, Danone. And about 3 years ago, I set up my little company, Don't Forget to Look, with the mission of helping agencies get better at selling to brands. So a little bit of poacher turned gamekeeper. So moving from buying marketing services on behalf of the brand to helping agencies navigate that whole process a bit better. So we do lots of things like, negotiation trainings. We help agencies on pitches. We help with positioning, pipeline, value-based selling workshops, that sort of thing. So yeah, done a bit of work with Matt and Candyspace over the last couple of years on a couple of those topics, and yeah, really get excited about helping agencies get better at how they sell, basically. So yeah, it's good to have this chat, and I'm sure we'll cover some good ground.
Stu's amazing at that, and actually, even though we have sat on opposite sides of the table, we've remained friends ever since. So it proves that procurement and agencies can have a valuable, long-lasting relationship.
There you go.
Unless the conversation takes a turn for the worse, but let's see. So we're going to start with you, Stu. What is the first thing that you think it's critical that agencies should know about procurement?
I suppose almost starting off with a note of caution in the current economic climate is that the pressure to achieve low price is still there, and maybe even more so than it has been pre-COVID. So yeah, so it's almost starting off with that bit of a reality check. And I think one of the key things for agencies to know is that there's just no point feeling down and moaning about it. I think we want to not waste energy fighting that reality. We have to focus on becoming better than your competition at dealing with that, right? So we want to change the conversation from price to value. The agencies that are most successful at the moment are those who can talk in terms of results and effectiveness, but also can look at things like progressive remuneration models that involve risk reward. So trying to move away from price focused, essentially tactical conversations that will only lead to your prices going down. If we start a conversation talking about a rate card, there is an inherent power that the brand probably has as the one sitting on all the money. So agencies who can articulate value rather than talk about price and cost are the ones that are winning at the moment. So you need to get obsessed with understanding the results that you can create and articulating those and defending those to the brands. I think that's a really key skill that all of the agencies that I work with now, who are still converting well, who are converting better than before, they're getting good at talking about value and effectiveness and results. So what does that look like? I talked about trying to avoid a tactical conversation that's going to lead to a very price sensitive kind of discussion. Well, you need to be getting really good at asking good questions and asking them early. I think it was Chris Voss, the FBI hostage negotiator, who's got a great book called Never Split the Difference. He also does a very good series of lessons on what's that app? Masterclass. So 3 years ago, when I set up Don't Forget to Look, I watched Chris Voss's masterclass on negotiation, and he talks about being interested and interesting and how that builds trust. And I think if you apply that to what agencies need to be doing with brands, it's about asking great questions. So rather than talking very quickly about price and even about a brief or about a project, great questions look and sound like, where do you want to be in 2 years' time? What's keeping you awake at night? If money was no object, what sort of work could we do together? You know, these sorts of great questions. And what happens to the recipient, the person who's buying, is that they will see you as very strategic. They will lean in. There will be less buying resistance. So value-based selling would dictate, you know, we've got to ask great questions. And you uncover over time the needs of the business, the opportunity, even potentially what the budget's likely to be by asking great questions. And the longer that you can anchor the conversation at a very strategic level, the better that is, and it will differentiate you from your competition as well. So that's a really key thing. So, you know, take heart from the fact that marketing will always be an investment for growth, not a cost to be cut. And but yeah, just do be aware that price pressure is going to be there, and it's not the brand's responsibility necessarily to unpick that. It's the agency's opportunity to become really good at navigating that conundrum, that reality. So I think that would be my first one.
That's a really good steer, and I'm glad you brought up cost. And yeah, I think we absolutely have to be mindful that I've never met a client in my life who said, our budget's unlimited, so whatever you tell us it's going to cost, we'll just pay it.
Yeah.
So there's always a budget. There's always an ambition of what a client wants to achieve with that budget. But my first point of what procurement should know about agencies is that costs can be a collaborative exercise. So the reason I say that, Stu, is that I've been in procurement processes in the past, and I understand the reason for this. It's because you absolutely have to try and benchmark like for like one vendor against another, where we've been asked to provide costs, very granular costs broken down against a series of activities, and never have the chance to justify why we've put the certain effort against certain activities or not against others. And what I would say is costs can and should always be a collaborative exercise, even through a pitch process. So what in the scenario I said, where there's always a budget and there's always an ambition, an agency can be very good at is helping a business understand what can you achieve from that ambition and how can you achieve that within the budgets that you've got. So what compromises might need to be made, what efficiencies can there be, and ultimately, as you say, I'm sort of agreeing with you, right? What are the things that will deliver the most value to a business and the most value to that business's customer within the budgets? And I feel like if procurement were more willing to enter into a discussion around that and a collaboration around that, rather than keeping whatever the budget they might know hidden from agencies and then asking them to cost against a very granular sort of series of deliverables, that may benefit both agency and the business. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. When we're talking about costs, I think we're probably more correctly talking about price, right? And I think we don't necessarily want to use them interchangeably. But I guess to my original point, it's nice that our first 2 points almost are kind of different sides of the same coin. One point to make is that there are lots of different commercial levers that are going to be pushed and pulled between both teams, and price is only one of them. Right, and we all want to get like to a price that we're happy with, but there are other things as well that are going to be important to both parties, or that are going to be levers that can be traded, conceded on, defended more aggressively or not. And you know, things like contract length, payment terms, ownership of IP, exclusivity, those sorts of things are also quite important. And I think with your type of business, Matt, it lends itself quite well to sort of more progressive remuneration models around what's going to be delivered. So if, for example, there is a client who is fully online, you know, their .com is their shop window, it's where their money comes in as well. So let's say they're a DTC brand, they're selling online, and they come to you and they want a whole suite of improved digital products through which their consumers can buy. What you wouldn't be then doing, which maybe would have happened a while ago, several years ago, might have been, okay, how long do we think it's going to take? How many pages is a website going to be? And we'll build a pricing stack based on the expected amount of time. I think it's more and more accepted now that the value in the discussion is more around the return on the investment rather than just the price. So that could be, okay, the business that we're pitching for or discussing, last year they sold 100 million worth of revenue through the old website, and they want to grow that to 150 in the next 2 years. Conceivably, your remuneration model could be based on them hitting increments of that extra 50 million, right? So the UI, the UX, all of that stuff is so much better. You're A/B testing all the pages. You've got everything in the right place, whatever it may be. There's an option there to look at more outcome-based pricing, and that's collaborating on price. That's a strategic discussion around you showing, so again, value-based selling, you're showing the brand that you want to be paid for the effectiveness of the work, the improvement in the amount of sales that they're generating per year through their .com. And that's already going to set you apart from the competition, just offering to see it that way. So I think that's a huge thing. The race to the bottom on fees tends to happen when the discussion about fees is not strategic or linked to business objectives, but is linked to how many hours is the front end developer spending on it, and how many hours is the managing director actually going to be involved, and can we just not pay for that person? Link it to the you know what it's like. So link it to what the business objectives are. Yeah, no one's going to pay for your time, Matt. So no, so link it. But if you can continuously, through every opportunity and touch point that you have in discussing the potential project with the brand, if you can reinforce the feeling of we're about delivering value and the business results that you need, then again, all you're looking to do is differentiate yourself from the competition. And sometimes that question of price can be a collaboration. That's an open goal for agencies that are able to and willing to put themselves on the hook for some business results.
Yeah, I'm very respectful of that, and I think most agencies actually are willing to do that. I think where it sometimes becomes challenging in a sort of complex ecosystem, particularly working with the bigger businesses, is can you be in control of all the variables that are going to deliver that success and create an outcome-based model that the agency feels confident they're completely in control of the outcomes of. Let's not get into the detail of how we might do that, but I think the willingness and the ambition is definitely there to do that. And I think, if procurement's willing to enter into that as a collaborative discussion, I think, that would benefit both of us. We're agreeing on everything. That's good. Let's see if we can disagree on the next one.
I was just going to say, because the point that you've made about not being able to influence everything is important, and agencies who are watching this will be concerned about that. But of course, we've got different types of measures. We've got the quantitative stuff that's measurable, and it's you can't argue with it. The result's the result. But you can also be offering things that are more qualitative, like customer satisfaction surveys. And I think having that in your armory, just being able to discuss those is important. Now, there's never not a risk with offering these things. You could say, if you're extremely cynical, that the brand could botch that and give you low marks so that they don't have to pay the bonus. But simply in the sales process, in that discovery period of getting to know each other, building trust, building understanding of what the right results and outputs and outcomes should be, if you buy into the theory that an agency's key job is to differentiate itself from a very loud marketplace, there's lots of agencies doing similar things, and marketing procurement person might arguably think, everyone's pretty similar. That's an undifferentiated agency landscape. The differentiated agency has more power in the discussion. So if you're seen as truly expert, as truly different, as head and shoulders above the competition, and you're offering different remuneration models, and there's risk reward on both sides, you're putting skin in the game, these are all things that reinforce that differentiation and that sense at the brand of we've come to the experts, we've come to the authority on this topic.
For sure. I tried to get the last word on that point, but in true procurement style, you managed to get the last word. So, but you are right with all those points. But let's move on to your second thing that agencies should know about.
Yeah, so this is maybe a little bit of a best case scenario one, but certainly one that I've seen to be true in good marketing procurement teams over the years, is that I'd want agencies to know that procurement can be and want to be an ally to agencies, but also to their brand stakeholders. So one of my favorite phrases about good marketing procurement teams is that the mission should be simply to bring the best of the outside inside. It's not about I'm a process runner, I'm a negotiator, I'm a marketing contract expert. If the mission is simply to bring the best of the outside inside, what does that mean? And why is it under this point of procurement want to be an ally and can be an ally? What it means is that procurement are not just there to run all of these processes, they're also there to know the agency landscape, movers and shakers, mergers and acquisitions, and they will have an understanding that the brand stakeholders are busy delivering their day job. And in a non-mandated environment, so a lot of brands do not have to work with their marketing procurement stakeholders, certainly below a certain budget. It's important that the marketing procurement team are earning that trust, earning that seat at the table, which is a very well-worn phrase at this point in terms of being able to get a seat at the table with marketing and in order to actually earn the right to buy some stuff. So agencies, what can an agency do with that thought or that perspective from me is thoughtful, well-timed, personalized, non-salesy outreach is really good for building a relationship with procurement. It'll get you front of mind. If you can be offering something that's clearly well prepared and well thought out to a marketing procurement person and then offer them something. So a little sense of reciprocity, which is one of Dr. Cialdini's 6 shortcuts to influence and persuasion. Just say, look, I think that you would find this thought leadership piece interesting, or this article in The Drum or Campaign Magazine, or something that Beamer did, or whatever it may be. So something very personalized, well-researched, thoughtful, and offering a little insight into something that you've shown might be important to them. And you're just building that relationship. You're playing a long game. But the key, again, it's differentiating, it's staying front of mind. So yeah, the call out there is remember that procurement want to be and can really be a great ally in getting a relationship going with a brand.
That's really good to hear, and I think relates to my next point, which is FaceTime beats documentation. And it does really tie into what you said around procurement being an ally, but mine was more focused on actually when you're in a procurement process. And I think something that agencies find challenging sometimes is procurement processes that keep potential partners or the vendors in the process at arm's length. And so there's lots of requests for lengthy documentation. There's an allowance that you can submit written questions and then you'll get written responses back. But the thing that doesn't seem to be allowed really is any FaceTime with either procurement or with the stakeholders that ultimately the work's going to sit with. And I think that must make it very challenging to make the right decision as you're a business, because for me, the thing that will probably give you the most reassurance that this is the right partner for you, that you'll be able to work together, that they'll be able to deliver value for the business and the customers, is to actually spend time with them. And there are different ways that might be done in a fair way across the procurement process. I guess, if everyone was allowed an hour workshop and could either be defined by the agency themselves or could be defined by procurement. I just think that FaceTime, in line with what you said around being an ally, is something that could often be of more value in a procurement process than perhaps it most typically is at the moment.
Yeah, and there's so much stuff in there, because I think procurement processes are long overdue some innovation in and almost an acceptance that if we try to make it an apples to apples comparison and an agency just wants to be a banana, then what do you do? right? So like we don't want to be reductive. I think the best marketing procurement teams now will start to innovate on what does a fair comparison look like, and ultimately they need to start with the end in mind, which is the impact on the consumer or in the marketplace. And does everything need to be apples to apples? Does everything have to be a rate card where the agency shows their overhead and profit? And it's no one's business to ask that stuff, really. So the issue here is about flexibility and innovation and how brands engage agencies. What I see a lot when I speak to agencies about improving how they sell, their conversion rate, their profitability, and these sorts of outcomes, is that you need to have a very balanced pipeline in terms of how you're generating your sales. So if you rely on a lot of RFPs or a lot of processes run by the brand, you're going to fall into those trickier processes which are hard to navigate. And you need to balance that pipeline with very good, thoughtful outreach, where you have a high degree of authority, relevance, case studies, hopefully awards won, and a really cool process that gives the brand the comfort that your award-winning work that you've done someone else, they'll get some of that as well, because you've got this great fine-tuned process. So it's almost the documentation being the RFP, yes, very restrictive and very tricky. The FaceTime is almost the line in the sand for maybe how the agency would do their outreach and having conversations. But there's a lot of, if you've read something like the Win Without Pitching Manifesto by Blair Enns, his equivalent of this question is that it's something along the line, one of his proclamations is something along the lines of, and I'll hate it when I get it wrong because I was on his podcast recently. It's, we'll do with words what we used to do with presentations. It's along those lines. And that goes back to the previous point about if you can have a really open, strategic conversation about what's keeping the CMO up at night, what's the biggest issue with the consumer, what are the things that need to start happening, stop happening, keep happening in terms of your marketing operation, and you have those sorts of great conversations, and you have them face to face, and you build trust, and you show that you're interested and interesting, to the point about Chris Voss and the impact of that sort of great questioning, is that the understanding of what the client needs grows gradually over time, as does trust. And by the time you've actually written a proposal with a price, it's almost like it should fall into your lap at that point, because it's been so nicely defined and iteratively more understood that the FaceTime, probably one person in the agency, one person at the brand, they've solved the problem themselves as to what needs to be done, rather than two procurement people, two people from the brand, everyone from the agency working 24 hours a day for 3 weeks on a pitch. It's almost like, where do you get most bang for your buck in terms of human capacity and better output is probably the conversations.
Yeah, so, for sure.
Yeah, it feels all of that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like the process of pitching is something that, I'm not quite that old, but feels like it's been going on since the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Like it doesn't seem to have been disrupted or innovated on that much since then. And, from an agency perspective, I love pitching. I love the theatre of it and the excitement and the fact that everyone has to stay up all night the night before to get it right. And the creative director throws everything out the day before, so you have to start again. All the stuff you don't see, Stu, when it comes really slickly to you. But for me, the idea that a business could then make a judgment based on that 1 hour or 1 hour and a half in the room, plus some documentation been sent, just seems slightly crazy to me, without any deeper time to engage with what really is going to drive the value. And just sort of simple things around pitching, like agencies will always be asked, please put in front of us the people who are going to be working on the project and not the pitch team. And I absolutely respect why that's asked, because you don't want to just see the leadership team who are going to disappear. But on the other hand, there are people who are brilliant practitioners who will do the most amazing job for the brand when they're working on it as a UX designer or as a developer or whatever, who are just terrible in those situations because that's not their skill. They're not good at doing the showbiz and the razzmatazz, and like the two things aren't the same skill. So yeah, that always provides a challenge for us. But yeah, I think sort of agreeing that actually that engagement, the deeper strategic conversations can help differentiate one agency from another and really help you guys, I hope, determine who's going to deliver the most value.
Yeah, and I think what I've seen over the last 3 years, now that I work with agencies, and working on a lot of pitches, is that there is still a lot of room to grow for even the most progressive brands in terms of how innovative they are in pitching. The fact is that in the private sector, there are no rules on how you have to pitch or you have to choose the cheapest supplier like there is in the public sector.
Yeah.
So it's a really wide open door for innovation. And there's been 1 or 2 nice stories recently about innovations in pitching where, you know, global brand has had a very non-prescriptive type of pitch process, and 3 agencies have been able to spend a full half day with the marketing team working on the problems, and that's like a really good sort of kickoff point, and then the, you know, things lead from there. So it's not as restrictive as what we've probably both seen from well, certainly what I've seen from both sides of the table is, if you ask a question, we're going to share it with everyone else because it has to be fair, and you have to use this pricing template because that's the only easiest way to compare, and so on as well. I can see why those things are in place from a fairness point of view, and I'm not arguing with fairness. I just think when push comes to shove, it's more important for the brand that there is growth, right? That the impact on the consumer happens, or the, you know, the net revenue increases, market share increases, whatever it may be. I think that being a fact, the brand is not a charity. Doesn't that mean that we should all be pushing for a bit more innovation in how we pitch, and just seeing where that takes us? And I think I'd love to see more of it, but I think it's also incumbent on the agencies to, and again, it comes down to, have you achieved differentiation? Can you exert more control on the pitch process? You know, if someone says to the best agency in the world, okay, it's going to be 180-day payment terms and you know, whatever else it may be, the agency can just as well say, well, our standard payment terms are 30 days. And then it's whoever basically has the most to lose, or whoever has the most power in the conversation, is probably the best way to put it. Whoever has the most power in the conversation wins. So again, I'll always come back to, if you've achieved differentiation, your control and power in the conversation increases to the point where, again, to take the rate card example, please fill in this rate card. You could say as an agency, fair enough, we'll fill it in, but we haven't used them for 5 years. Here's how we normally price this work, right? Sure. And it's outputs and it's outcomes or whatever. And, you know, a more enlightened marketing procurement soul who maybe has, you know, cross-referenced their success metrics with the marketing team, and they're not at cross purposes in what they have to deliver, you know, savings versus growth, then they might be willing to accept that. You might be able to have a value conversation about results and ROI rather than price. Sure. The differentiation thing, the example that I like to think of is, like, you wouldn't go and tell a doctor, you know, your treatment plan, what's wrong with you. You go in and you say, here's my problem. The doctor is kind of sacrosanct. You know, there's an implied skill and knowledge and learning and training. And this is because they are seen as experts. The same with you wouldn't, you know, come to your lawyer or to your pilot and tell them how to do their job. You think they've got a pretty specific skill set. So again, the point I'm sort of getting at is, if you're seen as one as many, you haven't differentiated yourselves, you're going to have these very tactical price-led discussions. If you're seen as the expert, you're going to have more authority and control over the sales discussion. You're going to be more likely to have the payment terms that you want. the kind of process and, you know, the way that you'll engage or do intake sessions or whatever it may be, that's based on the award-winning work that you've done, you're going to say that, well, this work spits out awards all the time. You want an FE, you want a Candline, you come to us for our process. So don't sort of mess with it. And this is what it costs. You can have gold, silver, bronze. You can have option 1, 2, or 3. That comes from being seen as differentiated, and it's very hard to achieve. Yeah, there are lots of ways to do it that we haven't got time to get into today. But
well, I don't know if you remember this, but we tried to differentiate ourselves. The very first time that I pitched to you, I destroyed a cashmere scarf with a bottle of tomato ketchup.
Did you really?
Yes.
I don't remember that, Matt. I mean, we're going back to that 23rd. We're going back 10 years. We are going back 10 years.
That was something really memorable, and it clearly hasn't worked. So I'll go back to the drawing board on that. There was a reason for it, I should say. But anyway, we'll move on.
I believe that it happens, and I wouldn't put it past you. But I think I must have done 300 pitches in my time brand side, and yeah, that is going back about 10 years. So apologies.
No need to apologise. I don't think it worked. So let's swiftly move on to
sure.
The last point. What's the last thing that agencies should know about procurement?
So I actually feel like we might have covered a bit of it in our chat already. But the final one I was wanting to raise is that not every procurement process will be an RFP. Not every procurement person will ask for a rate card. So that rigidity of that process that we have kind of touched on a little bit. So we just need to be, as an agency, ready to flex our approach, you know, to be able to articulate why we're different and defend it well, and gain more power in that discussion. I think, as I think more about the notes that I have and the prep that I did for this one, we've got into it a lot actually in the last 5 minutes. I guess sort of offering one firm example on the getting away from the, you know, please provide a rate card. Now, of course, we don't want to be annoying and rock the boat and say, you know, we refuse. The key is kind of how you land it. And I think one of the nice ones on rate cards versus sort of outputs is we can say about outputs, you know, an output guarantees you a result and a product in a fixed amount of time, where a rate card doesn't. So, you know, we like to think about outputs and outcomes and not have to have everyone worrying about timesheets. And you're almost giving this sense of, you know, we're all experts, we're all big boys and girls. We don't need to be on each other's cases about tracking timesheets. What we're actually here for is the result. So I think that's a kind of nice example that I like to use is if we moved onto output-based pricing, you get the thing that you paid for on the date that you paid for it, right? And if we move on to a retainer, there are no results guaranteed. All there is, you know, a certain amount of time expected. And so, yeah, that's one of the ones that I like to use in terms of defending outputs over sort of time and materials. Yeah, the other one I wanted to mention is in terms of processes and how brands buy and how they like to buy. It's often the case where we want to, as the agency, try to maximize the initial engagement. We want to say, you know, can we have a 12-month retainer? Can we have, you know, whatever it may be? But there's a lot of research that shows that smaller phased engagement is a great way to build trust and reduce buying resistance. So it's much easier for the brand to start with a smaller engagement. So agencies need to have products, deliverables that are based around smaller engagements as well. So you may have a great UI and UX diagnostic product that, you know, at Candyspace, where you can get all these inputs from the brand, current performance, where does it need to go, any current issues, whatever it may be. But you'd have your 10 inputs that you need. You take it back to Candyspace, you mix it around, and out comes your report, your diagnostic, which identifies, making up a number, 4 themes. But these are all 4 themes, types of work that you can deliver, and you get to price them up. And, you know, this diagnostic tool has gained trust And it's maybe something that's only taken a few days. It's maybe 5, 10, 15K. Not something that has to cost the earth, but it's not something that you should give away as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's a small initial engagement that builds trust. There's a piece of research which backs that up as well, which I can tell you about in a minute if you want.
No, for sure. And yeah, I don't think there's any resistance to proving our value through smaller pieces of work or diagnostic from agencies. I think where agencies find it challenging in the scenario that you talked about, in a sort of a series of smaller phased pieces of work, is that one of the things that's most valuable to agencies is consistency and longevity of relationships, because that obviously allows us to ensure that we've got a consistent set of people with the commercial reassurance for us as a business behind them to deliver to a brand, rather than having to go hand to mouth each time, worry about our own traffic and resourcing, who's going to be working on what where. And I'm not sure it always creates the best results for a client, because you lose that consistency. So we genuinely sort of try to strive to persuade our clients to engage us over a longer period, to give them that consistency, to get deep under the skin of the brand, to have the same group of people who develop that deep understanding. And that's where the value comes, I think.